It's hard to contain emotions, perhaps, but we're in a business to be leaders. We're in a business that we're supposed to be able to contain our emotions, contain ourselves in such a way that we are good leaders and we're good examples for the American people, and that they can be proud of us in what we're doing. They may disagree with us on our policies. They may disagree strenuously. Mr. Green, I consider him a friend, at least an acquaintance. We don't hang out a lot or on the same committees, but we chat together in the hallways and stuff. I like him. I hope he likes me too. And we have probably extremely different views on some issues, and I know he expresses himself some pretty strong views and emotions as well. And that's fine when you're doing that in debate and we're doing that in the proper format here. But a decorum to this hallowed chamber for what this stands for well over 200 years requires us to be able to operate much better than that. And so I wasn't so much mad last night as I sat just a few chairs over from Mr. Green. I was just really mostly disappointed that it had to come to that. I've had presidents I've strongly disagreed with the rhetoric or their policies, and I think they've been, in my view, very, very harmful to the country. But you don't act that way. You don't completely disrupt the operations of this chamber in the State of the Union, the address last night, for your own theater. And that's what I'm afraid it was. Did he feel strongly? Certainly. But you don't act that way. You don't wave your walking stick around at people like that. It's just not good. It's improper. It's not the way we're supposed to conduct ourselves in this place or at any public forum, city council level, what have you, and including the town halls. I enjoy having town halls by and large, but if they're going to be advertised as a forum, as a free-for-all for people to come out and do screaming matches, and what should we do, just turn on the clock for 90 minutes and have at it? I would like that the interactions at our local level could be constructive and both sides hear each other to understand what's going on. But in this chamber here, during that hallowed event, when the whole country and the whole world is watching, for someone to be able to single out their own interest or their own theater because they disagree strongly with the president they don't like, it's really, really bad decorum, a really bad way of doing business. And, Mr. Green, I don't enjoy casting this vote if it should come up tomorrow at all. I like you personally, and I wish we could have done better last night. So, I hope we can count each other as friends after this. I don't hold any long-term, anger or angst, but it just wasn't good. I wish I could have took you aside last night and said, let's not do this. But unfortunately it happened, and this is a proper reaction. We can't let this just stand. It has to be done correctly. We have to have a decorum for this House, and this censure is what's necessary to hit that reset and do so. So I appreciate the time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington yields.
Reserve.
Reserves.
Speaker,
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
I have great respect for the gentleman who just spoke, but where was he? Where were the Republicans when Joe Biden was president of the United States? I remember sitting here, and there was an entire heckling section on the Republican side. And we didn't call for all of those members to be removed. We wanted to go on with the people's business. But where were you? Where were my Republican friends? Nobody apologized for interrupting Joe Biden time and time again. Some of you talk about lack of decorum. Go back and look at the tapes. And there was silence on the Republican side. So I appreciate your selective outrage, but you had more credibility had you expressed outrage when your colleagues were heckling Joe Biden. I now yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And still I rise. And I rise to explain why I did what I did. And I did it with intentionality. The president indicated that he had a mandate. I said to the president, you do not have a mandate to cut Medicaid. I have constituents who need Medicaid. They will suffer and some will die if they don't get Medicaid. I heard the speaker when he said that I should cease. I did not, and I did not with intentionality. It was not done out of a burst of emotion. I was emotional about it, but I did it with intentionality. I think that on some questions of conscience, you have to be willing to suffer the consequences. And I have said I will. I will suffer whatever the consequences are, because I don't believe that in the richest country in the world, people should be without good health care. I stood up for my constituents then. I'm standing up for my constituents now. I am grateful to Mr. McGovern for what he has said. I'm grateful to those who have been standing with me. But I will tell you, I appreciate you. No anger. The officers who escorted me out, they were kind to me. I don't blame the speaker for anything. Friends, I would do it again. I have to be candid with you. I'm not trying to in some way insult you. This is a matter of principle. This is a matter of conscience. There are people suffering in this country because they don't have health care. I'll close with this. On some issues that are matters of conscience, it is better to stand alone than not stand at all. This is where I stand. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield as much time as he may consume. A gentleman from Washington, Mr. Baumgartner.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by thanking my colleague from Washington State, Mr. Newhouse. Donald Trump is not the Republican president. He's the American president. And what happened last night was beneath the dignity of the House and beneath the dignity of the American people. And I say that as someone who is new to this body. I'd also like to point out how it was perceived and how it may have been interpreted. As you know, each member of the House receives a guest ticket, and I decided to give my guest ticket, the first one that I would have for this kind of occasion, to a teacher from Eastern Washington, with the goal of inspiring an interest in civics and public service in that next generation of young people. In fact, we ran a competition for students to nominate their teacher. And the winning teacher that came had never been to Washington, D.C. before, had never been to the halls of Congress, and was so excited that she was here to watch this. And I have no idea what her political beliefs were. No idea whether she's Republican or Democrat or independent. She was just excited to be here as part of this experiment in democracy that we have. And all of her students were watching from home. And, you know, while it can be regrettable when, and it happens on both sides, when people have a spontaneous outburst of emotion and maybe say something they should, you know, what I saw and what I worry about what her students saw last night was a continued, premeditated attack, and some might even say the appearance of a violent and threatening action with the cane. And so that may have not been the intent, but I worry that those students and what I saw as I watched was a scene that was beneath the dignity of this House, beneath the dignity of the American people, and certainly beneath the dignity of our president. And so at some point, America cannot continue on this slide towards continual partisan fighting and all of the divisiveness. We all need to do better, including myself, I think every member of this body. So let's join together on this. Let's join together and realize that this episode was beneath the dignity of what the American people expect from Congress. And let's have this be a new beginning in civility from a low point that this body can rise and behave in the manner I think all of the people, the way that all the American people want it to behave, and certainly those high school students that were watching from home, so excited that their teacher was here to experience this special moment. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to the gentleman who just spoke, if he felt that the most offensive thing last night was Mr. Green coming to this floor, standing up in this chamber and pleading with the president not to cut people's health care, if he thinks that was the most offensive thing that occurred on the House floor last night, then I don't think he was paying attention to the speech that was being given by the President of the United States. Go back and reread it. Go back and reread it. A totally divisive and partisan speech, name-calling senators, berating Joe Biden. It was a campaign speech. And so when he says that the president is supposed to be the president of the entire United States, not just Republicans, boy, I wish we had seen that last night, but we didn't. In all my years, I have never, ever witnessed anything as partisan and as divisive as that. And at this point, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Del Bene.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One thing we should be talking about are the important investments that we make in medical research. The United States leads the world in medical research and innovation. Without our investments, more people would be dying from cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. But the medical breakthroughs of tomorrow are at risk because of Trump's research cuts at the National Institutes of Health. These cuts will be especially felt in my home state of Washington, where we are leaders in advancing world-class scientific research that saves lives. Washington is home to the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, where I recently visited to highlight the devastating impacts of these cuts on the 40,000 patients they serve each year. In fiscal year 2024, Washington researchers were awarded nearly $1.3 billion in NIH funding that supports 12,000 jobs in our state. One of my constituents works at an organization fighting autoimmune diseases. It is 80% funded by NIH investments. She's worried about the devastating impact these cuts would have on the patients who rely on their work. I started my career in medical research, and I know what losing funding or even the threat of it being cut off could have on institutions and their patients. The consequences of the president's decision will be felt in so many ways. Labs could go dark. Patients could be kicked off of life-saving critical trials. New cures could be delayed. Future innovators could abandon the field. The president must stop this senseless attack on the research that saves money, but most importantly, saves lives. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, Mr. Green deliberately disrupted Congress's proceedings in joint session. This was an affront to the Constitution, which commands that the President report to the Congress from time to time. It was an insult to the presidency, and it was a disgrace to this body. It was perpetrated not by some lunatic wearing buffalo horns, but rather by an elected member of the United States Congress. This is worthy of the harshest sanctions that we can apply. But many members repeatedly interrupted this presidential address with catcalls and insults and other gestures of disrespect, You know, when a member once did this to President Obama, he apologized and he was reprimanded. I didn't hear an apology from Mr. Green just now. What I heard was deliberate, calculated defiance. The whole reason for this building to exist, the whole reason for this House chamber, is to exchange our views, sometimes very sharply different views, and talk out the differences among us. But in order for that to work, that discussion has to be accompanied by civility and decorum. And accordingly, our rules insist on that. I believe that all those who breach these rules need to be held accountable, lest this become just another sad milestone in the denigration of this institution. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States yesterday said a lot of things. He used a personal insult against a sitting senator from my home state. And the gentleman who just spoke, he's upset that someone stood up and asked him not to cut Medicaid? Really? I mean, that's what this is all about? You heard from Mr. Green. I mean, there's not a gentler soul in this chamber. And he was offended by some of the things the President was saying yesterday. And I'm all for decorum. But, I mean, where's the decorum in throwing poor people off of health care? You know, or where's the decorum in cutting food benefits and nutrition benefits to people who are in desperate need, or cutting school meals? I mean, where's the decorum in that? These are not usual, these are unusual times that we are in. You know, they're firing veterans as we are gathered here today. People who serve our country with distinction. And, you know, and our constituents and your constituents are upset. And here we're upset because somebody got up and pleaded with the President not to cut Medicaid. Again, where were all of my Republican friends when we had a heckling session year after year of Republicans berating Barack Obama? Nothing. Nothing. I mean, I can't believe we're having this debate. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of my constituents have been illegally fired by Elon Musk and by Donald Trump. One of them was with me last night, Dr. Lauren McGee, who is an NIH pediatric cancer specialist who is heading up a team looking into osteosarcoma, bone cancer for children. She got fired on February 14th because she was a probationary employee. Probationary not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she'd been promoted into the new job. And she was with me last night, and she had to sit here and listen along with me, and I'd spent the day with her, to Donald Trump saying one of their top priorities is to fight childhood cancer, and she got sacked on that Valentine's Day massacre. Now they want to censure the gentleman from Texas. Why? Because he challenged the president about his claim that he's got a mandate to cut Medicaid. And that's what the gentleman was trying to raise. Well, we've got Republicans in the chamber who have never voted to impeach Donald Trump for inciting a violent insurrection against this Congress, this Constitution, and his own vice president, who's never voted to even censure the president for doing that, and yet they want to censure the gentleman from Texas. Last night, Donald Trump, President Trump, called a U.S. Senator from Massachusetts Pocahontas, using an ethnic slur to go after her. So I assume that you really want to proceed to censure the gentleman from Texas for talking about no mandate to cut Medicaid, then certainly we're going to have to move to censure the president for using a racial and ethnic slur against a sitting United States senator. But I would prefer to stand by the tradition of free speech and even the tradition of heckling. You know, there's a fine American art of heckling. If you read the Lincoln Douglas debates, I recommend the Harold Holzer version of it because the newspapers carried all of the hecklers' comments too. and people would get up and heckle, and Lincoln would interact with them, and Douglas would interact with them.
The gentleman's recognized for additional 30.
Let's stop clutching our pearls. There's been lots of heckling over on that side of the aisle. I saw the gentlelady from Georgia heckle the last president and have a whole heckling section there. We didn't try to censure them or kick them out of Congress or anything. We actually not only say we believe in free speech, we believe in free speech. And we will stand up for people's right to speak. Now, I don't believe in the kind of heckling where you drown somebody out and you make it impossible for them to speak. But the gentleman was trying to start a conversation as opposed to just being spoken to all night. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the president. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this is very interesting to listen to the arguments coming from the other side of the aisle about what we're doing here tonight. In talking about free speech, it seemed to me that the gentleman from Texas was doing all he could to prohibit or get in the way of the President of the United States exercising his free speech and his address to the joint session. This is not about policy. This is not about whether Republicans are better than Democrats or vice versa. This is about how we conduct ourselves on the House floor. This is about how we treat each other. This is a reflection on every single one of us in this chamber. And as my colleague from the state of Washington said, it's not just us this affects. This affects the kids of our country as well, who are learning one way or the other. They're learning from our examples. So you can go on and on about how much you disagree and detest some of the policies and positions of the President of the United States. Be my guest. But that is not what's being argued tonight. That is not the issue that we're taking a stand on today. This is how we, as a body, should conduct ourselves in this hallowed hall, this chamber, that not very many people ever get to set foot into. This is something that we should hold to a higher standard. We have to, or else what are we? Are we just a debate club that yell at each other? Or do we stand for something? Do we truly see ourselves as representatives of the people of the United States? So something has to change. It truly does. A line has to be drawn. Not all of us are on either side of the aisle are perfect examples of what we could or should be. But certainly, as I mentioned before, in my career here, I have never, ever seen a member of Congress escorted from the floor of the House by the Sergeant at Arms. It's never happened in my career. And I don't want to see it happen again. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Well, you know what's never happened in my career? A President of the United States coming before a joint session of Congress and insulting members by name individually, shouting slurs at people. I've never seen that before. I mean, maybe would the gentleman agree with me that Trump deserves a censure for calling my senator from Massachusetts a slur? Would that be appropriate? I mean, this was not business as usual yesterday. To make believe that somehow it was, or that the person who was giving the speech yesterday was acting within the structures of decorum, I mean, it's laughable. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Jackson.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the president. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expedience asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but one must take it because one's conscience tells it it's right. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the courage, the character, and the great decency of the Honorable Congressman Al Green for saying what is right when there are many amongst us that have cowardice, that have seemed to have lost their backbone and spine, to call out untruths. Mr. Speaker, a man that is standing up for those that are poor, that are left out, that have been left behind, a man that is standing up for Medicaid and Medicare. As we sit here and talk about some of this pious irrelevancy and this sanctimonious trivialities, this man should be being heralded and should be stand up for his decency, for his courage, for standing up for the poor, for the least of these. There's a theological problem in this institution when we are more kind to those that are rich and powerful than those that are poor. When we're talking about balancing the budget off the backs of those that need health care, that need housing, that need food assistance to give tax breaks to the rich. So once again, I ask all of my colleagues to join me in celebrating the Honorable Congressman Al Green. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman who just spoke 1 minute. It seemed longer. How much time do I have left?
13 and a half minutes.
Okay. Okay. I now happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
While Republicans try to distract us with this resolution, our constituents are reaching out to us. What are they asking us? They're asking us to stop the Republican assault on our schools, our livelihoods, our communities. Another constituent who reached out to me is named Chris. He is a student at Common Ground High School. Common Ground High School is an innovative educational, environmental, and community building venture. It combines a charter high school, an urban demonstration farm, and a community environmental education center. Due to the funding freeze, Chris said, essential programs at Common Ground, like the youth workforce development and community food relief, which also partners with a city seat to help people afford food stamp purchases from the farm, they've been shut down because of this freeze. And 71 student workers have been laid off. Students like Chris are reaching out not just because of their own future and their education has been affected, but because they see how their community is hurt by these cuts as well. These are people today around this country, not only in my district, are getting hurt thanks to Republican cuts. The funding freeze is not just killing the crops at Common Ground, it is killing academic futures, new ideas for education, opportunities for young people in this country. This is what Republicans are trying to do by distracting us with their censures. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, Al Green is my friend, and for that matter, so is Mr. Newhouse, though I don't know him quite as well. But I think this motion is a serious mistake. I sat here in this House the night that President Obama made his State of the Union speech. Joe Wilson from South Carolina jumped up and said, "You lie." Nothing was done about that. Mr. Green engaged in conduct that I chose not to participate in, though I found that a number of my constituents wish I'd joined him. He expressed his strong views in a way that I would not have voiced them myself, but he left this chamber voluntarily after doing so, and to censure him now sets us back. It does not move us forward toward a more bipartisan and a more respectful House. And indeed, I think many Americans will be surprised that Republicans get upset about decorum on anything. There was no Republican objection when President Trump decided to pardon the criminals that were responsible for the deaths of police officers in this building when they defended us on January the 6th, sprayed them with bear spray and harassed and harmed so many officers. There's been no Republican concern about decorum when the president fired the head of the Office of Ethics at the White House, when he fired the watchdogs at about 17 different federal departments and agencies, the inspectors general that are designed to uphold and check out corruption and waste in our government. There's been no outrage when President Trump decided that he would take on General Milley for being the patriot that he is and seek to obtain revenge on him. What Mr. Green was talking about was outrage about something that is very important. 700,000 seniors in Texas rely on Medicaid in nursing homes. Half the children in my hometown, and probably more in Mr. Green's, are at risk of losing their care, as seen in our children's hospital. Medicaid is a lifeline to individuals with disability. He was passionate, he was emotional, he's deeply committed to protecting the vulnerable. He should not be censored for the way in which he expressed his passion and his concern and his love of justice. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the comments of Mr. Doggett and do consider him a friend as well. But let me just tell you that we're talking apples to oranges when we're speaking about something that happened under President Obama's speech on the Republican side. Last night, Mr. Green was reprimanded at least 3 times by the Speaker to stop and desist on what he was doing. Shaking his cane at the President, at the rostrum, in a threatening manner, underscoring what I saw was emotion. Energy and emotion. And intentionality, absolutely. Intending to disrupt the speech by the President of the United States. So I think we're talking about 2 different things here. The incident during the Obama administration was over in just a few seconds. This went on and on and on with certainly debating the issue. That's one thing in different circumstances. This was not an open debate, and Mr. Green was trying to make it one. This was a message from the President. So that the actions that we're proposing to take here are absolutely justified. The President was here under invitation by the House of Representatives for a report to Congress. It was not an open debate. It was a message being received by the joint session. And that's the way it should be treated. The respect should be given to the presidency, whether or not they're your guy or they're your gal. It's the office of the president that needs the respect because it reflects on all of us as members of the House of Representatives. Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Tucano.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you for yielding, Ranking Member McGovern. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this resolution. I'm here as the ranking member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs to represent the interests of our nation's veterans when they're callously being targeted. And while our colleagues across the aisle are determined to shift the public narrative away from the harm being done to veterans, we choose to focus on what our president failed to address last night. He spent an hour and 40 minutes touting his so-called accomplishments while veterans watching at home were waiting for answers and explanations they never received. And while President Trump was addressing us last night on this very House floor, movements were being made by the Chief of Staff for Veterans Affairs, Christopher Cyrick, to execute a detrimental reduction in force at VA with the support of this administration. VA plans to move forward with firing an additional 83,000 VA employees. Sitting in the audience of President Trump's address were 20 veterans who had been indiscriminately fired from federal agencies, veterans he failed to address. Not once during his speech was he able to look them in the eyes and speak to the merciless effects his administration's decisions had made on their community. He didn't attempt to justify them because he knows there is no justification. Our veterans served our nation. They put their lives on the line for us and this country's values. And now look at what they're facing. They're facing attacks on their benefits. They're facing attacks on their health care, education, and housing. When we reduce an agency established to work for them, we fail them. I stand behind Congressman Green as he stood up for the rights of all veterans and all Americans. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Washington reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Okay.
You're up.
Is the gentleman prepared to close?
I am.
Okay. Let's make sure my. Okay.
Somebody on the way, but he's not here.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the remaining time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to say the virtue signaling we're seeing from Republicans right now is insane. I'm sorry. Who was it who yelled, "You lie," at President Obama during his address? A Republican. Who was it that heckled President Biden, standing up and ranting like lunatics? Republicans. Go back and look at the videos. It was embarrassing. And nothing was done about that. I am the ranking member of the damn Rules Committee, and I have a question. Why are the rules only applied to Democratic members? Are Republicans ready to censure their own members for wearing campaign hats in the chamber last night? That's a violation of the rules. Are they ready to censure the Republican member who got caught voting from California last month, which is a violation of the House rules? He wasn't even in the chamber. Hell, he wasn't even on the East Coast. Are these people going to be censured? Of course not, because their outrage is all BS. There was a breach of dignity and decorum in this chamber last night, but it wasn't Al Green. It was the President of the United States who stood at that podium and delivered a manifesto of pure fantasy. He says he wants to make America affordable again. Well, inflation just hit a 7-month high, and his new trade war will cost families $2,000 more a year. Trump says he wants to balance the budget. His plan would add $3 trillion to the deficit to give billionaires another tax cut. Let me repeat that again. To give billionaires a tax cut. All these cutbacks, all these firings are going to fund tax cuts for billionaires. He says Social Security is paying benefits to millions of people over 100 years old. Totally wrong. Debunked 100 times. He says he cares about childhood cancer. He slashed the funding for child cancer research. He says his tariffs are good for farmers. Last time he did this, farmers lost $27 billion. He says he supports law enforcement. He pardoned the people who beat police officers on January 6th. He pardoned them. People who tried to overturn the election. People who brutally beat the men and women who protect us in this chamber every single day. Just one outrageous statement after another, and not a single peep from my Republican friends, nothing. And now, Mr. Speaker, Republicans have the nerve to come down here and censure anyone. Republicans moved heaven and earth to come down here and defend the honor of their boss, Donald Trump. But they won't lift a finger for their own constituents. Look in the mirror and censor yourselves. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the President. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, you know, one of the things when I was a freshman in Congress that just shocked me, amazed me, is how easily events on the floor would devolve into what I would describe as something akin to a high school pep rally. And that pains me to say that. We are all adults here discussing some of the most important issues facing the American public, I would dare say the entire world, right here in this chamber. And for the things that happen in this chamber that reflect poorly on us, reflect poorly on every single one of us, I would say to you, Mr. Speaker, that this is truly a wake-up call for this chamber. The lack of decorum has reached a new low when the President of the United States cannot even come into our chamber invited and complete his speech without the interaction that we saw last night. We have to take this action of censure. And let me tell you, there are many people on my side of the aisle that would like to take this even further. The notion of intentionality versus emotion does not justify the actions that we witnessed last night, the disrespect of the institution. And using the argument that, well, our side did it, so we can do it too, well, that doesn't work. That does not hold water. Mr. Speaker, we can do better. Mr. Speaker, we must do better. We cannot ignore the willful disruption intended to stop a proceeding. And let me use another word that is also difficult to say. It was shameful. Without decorum, without respect, what do we got? What do we have? Truly. You've all seen the newsreels of other countries that chambers similar to ours devolve into fistfights on the floor. Is that where we're headed next? Is that what we want to have happen so that these fine people that work their tails off every day can be part of that and be the referees in a situation that is out of control? Like I said, this shameful action reflects on every single one of us. And you're right, I will concede, all of us need a reminder that we all need to raise our level of accountability and due to the actions that we take. So, Mr. Speaker, I think this is a necessary but difficult step. This resolution is offered in all seriousness. It's something that I believe that we must do in order to get us to the next level of conduct on this in this hallowed chamber. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I urge all of my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, to join with me to attain that better level of conduct. We owe it to our constituents, for sure. We owe it to our future constituents in this country. We owe it to our country. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the resolution. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays and a hearing aid.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, It adjourns to meet at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Without objection.
And then if you'll just adjourn us, yeah.
For what purposes? Gentleman from Washington seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Heard it this time. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, pursuant to the House Resolution 191, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow as a further mark of respect to the memory of the Honorable Sylvester Turner.